No matter what you try to do, you can't deny the truth. No, no. And what the people choose ain't really up to you. Actions always find a way.
All right. Well, this will be the very first episode of the Dr. Pope Show. And I'm here with Mohamed and really excited to have him on. He is a Palestinian-American, born and raised in Kuwait. He's originally from Jerusalem, where his father was born. He moved to the U.S. 3 years ago, finishing high school, then starting at San Diego State University, studying civil engineering, and also pursuing a minor in Islamic and Arabic Studies. Mohamed is highly passionate about his identity as a Muslim, Palestinian, and an Arab. Advocacy for his people is very important to him and is seen as a part of his daily life. Mohamed hopes to raise awareness about Palestine and spread the message. And we'll be sure to link all of his information and contact info in the bio there. So, welcome to the Dr. Ricky Pope Show. How are you doing?
It's my pleasure to be here. I feel honored, to be given this platform and, just to be here, to have a conversation with you, I feel like people don't have that enough. And so I'm happy to be here, being able to speak about who I am and my passions.
Exactly. So one of the things that I hope to explore with guests is identity, meaning, and purpose. And so we're going to just dive right into it. Mohamed, what is your origin story? Who are you?
I mean, I've been everywhere, like I prefer to just say Palestinian, but I am a Palestinian, but I've never lived there. My family is from Jerusalem, the East Side and the West Bank. I was born in Kuwait, given that my father's family and my mother's family both fled in the war in 1967, and they both found Kuwait as their home. And so I was born there, spent my entire life there. Although at the same time, I was never Kuwaiti. So it was kind of an identity crisis of sorts. I lived there, but I was always different. I was a Palestinian living in Kuwait, not a Kuwaiti. And at the same time, I had never lived in Palestine. So I was always confused with, who I was. Sometimes I'd doubt myself. I'd be ashamed of my identity. I'm proud to say, like now I speak it with all my chest, I'm a Palestinian. And I realize not living there means, like it doesn't mean anything, like I am a person in diaspora. That's how I view myself. And that's how millions of other Palestinians view themselves. And it's a beautiful thing because millions of us have never seen the land, generations kicked out, yet we hold an everlasting connection to it, given that that is where our ancestors were. That's the land that we grew up on, the land that the people before us came and lived there. So there's always that connection.
What does it mean to be a Palestinian studying in the U.S.? What does that mean for you?
It means a lot. One thing is, it means that some people automatically hate me. I came into high school in San Diego. I moved here in 2020. And I wasn't sure what to expect, but I was like, oh, this is America. Everyone's like open to each other. And I think one of the first interactions I had in relation to Palestine was someone calling me a terrorist. And it's not that I was really offended by it, given that this is something you get used to, but I was just more like shocked about it. Like, dang, this is really how it is. So I feel like to be a Palestinian in America means to have resilience. You have to have a backbone, like to be who you are. And, you either end up two ways. Either, you're proud of who you are and people hate you, or you choose to be silent. You get people to step on you, but then less people hate you. So I choose for people to hate me because I'm not going to hide my identity or who I am.
What's one thing that you've learned from an elder in your family?
So a lot that I learned came from my grandpa, given that my dad passed away when I was 10 years old. And one of the lessons he taught me that kind of sticks with me in everyday life is just the idea of honor. Honor, it's a big thing in Islam. And it means a lot of things. Like in one sense, it means to just be like a man of your word, meaning to hold your word, to be a person that people are able to trust, to hold your integrity, even if it doesn't, benefit you sometimes. Sometimes there's like the easier option to benefit yourself, where you are putting people beneath you. And I'm glad to have had my grandpa to teach me not to follow any of those desires or intentions, even if at some point I feel a person may feel regret that they're not advancing themselves, you know, at least it means you're not pushing people behind you. And so, yeah, growing up with my grandpa in Kuwait, one of the core memories I had was going to the mosque every Friday. And I'll be honest, I used to hate it because I was a little kid, you know, video games, my attention span sucked.
Okay.
I'd sit there listening to the lecture, but I was like playing with the carpet. But I'm so grateful he did that for me because now I love it and I go on my own. You know, I don't have my grandpa. He's in Kuwait, so I don't have him to force me every Friday, but I make that willing decision on my own to go to the mosque every Friday. So I feel like that's a habit he instilled in me at a young age. And yeah, a lot of my values do come from spending time with him.
And it also sounds like, in addition to your grandpa, faith is influential in your life.
Absolutely.
Can you say more?
Yeah, I think faith, you know, finds itself in every aspect of my life. Doesn't mean it's necessarily outward. You know, like, I'm not a person who necessarily talks a lot about my faith with others, but it does impact the way I act and the way I interact with people in the day-to-day life. You know, we're taught to always have kindness even in the face of, you know, people who are not kind. The word for that is called the sunnah. So the sunnah translates to like the life and actions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, the Prophet Mohammed. And this is apart from the Quran. So the sunnah is a collection of, we could say, actions that the Prophet used to practice in his day-to-day life that we are recommended to practice. And part of these are, you know, to always have a smile on your face, to always be kind to others, to always kind of try to see eye to eye, even if a person is not being just with you. You're always trying to be the person, you know, that follows like-mindedness, to have mindfulness, to pursue justice. And honestly, I see that relating to Palestine in a way, just because, you know, the Prophet always spoke on speaking up for those who don't have a voice and how we all have a duty to speak up against oppression. So I see those directly intertwined. Being a Muslim, being an advocate for Palestine, it's all connected, in my opinion.
Okay. And then, I mean, as I'm really sitting with what I hear you saying, I'm also wondering how being in America influences that and the message that you want to share with people.
You know, I feel being in America, I get conflicting views. A lot of times it's tempting. Sometimes it would be tempting to back down, given that life would technically be a lot easier. You know, I'm on campus now advocating for Palestine in peaceful means, you know. And yeah, I receive threats all the time, death threats, you know, more people calling me terrorists, other vulgar terms. And, you know, the terms themselves don't hurt, but I do always feel like I have a target on my back. You know, nationwide, there's been Palestinian students who are getting doxxed, or, you know, their information is getting leaked. People are trying to like ruin their careers, getting people fired, getting people expelled. So it is actually a threat. Not to say I do come from privilege. I'm not facing any direct violent threat, but at the same time, I'm not with a full peace of mind being here, choosing to advocate for Palestine. So sometimes, you know, you get that devil on your back, such as when I started university, I was thinking to myself, maybe I could just be on the quiet side, not say anything about Palestine, move along, have my group. But I kind of realized very quick that wouldn't be the case with me, because living with that shame would be a million times worse than, you know, some mean words that a student might tell me. So I guess for me, it's come to a terms of acceptance with it, given that I can't change it. You know, I am who I am. People will not like that. People will try to shut it down, but I just have to keep, you know, pushing.
So then what does activism mean for you?
I would say activism is like a part of my everyday life. You know, it is not specific to Palestine. You know, I see Palestine as an intersectional issue that has a lot of parallels with other issues worldwide, with other oppressed groups of people. And in that way, being in America, what I see different than being in Palestine is I try to find those connections with people of other groups, you know. Obviously, I do like to meet Palestinians and to have that in common, to be able to speak about my shared traumas and oppressions. But, you know, you can't keep yourself to that small focus group or concentration, you know, because there are, you know, plenty of other groups out there in America. And despite there not being like the exact same, you could say, events or oppression or history, there are a lot of actions or feelings that do overlap with all of them. So activism for me in America, in San Diego, means finding those connections with other groups, building those bridges and building that community, because that is something that existed historically. And sadly, I say it's been erased because, for example, no one really knows about like Palestinian and Black solidarity, but it's existed for decades. So that's something I'd hope to shed light on.
Oh, well, we have time to shed light on that. Can you say more about this solidarity?
Yeah, of course. So like going back a bit time in history, you know, the Black Panthers were prominent in America. And at the time, of course, they were considered terrorists. Mm-hmm. At the same time, you had in Palestine, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, who were, you know, fighting to end occupation. Mm-hmm. And obviously both were designated as terrorists. Mm-hmm. And you saw times in history, I would say probably in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, where they held joint conferences together to discuss their shared interests. There were posters made by both sides kind of showing a unified figure. Mm-hmm. You know, Huey Newton at the time actually visited the refugee camps, the Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon, and he met with the Fedayeen. So Fedayeen is an Arabic word for, I want to say like freedom fighter. A lot of times it wasn't trained people, it was people my age. It was like 18-year-olds picking up weapons to fight back, you know, against F-16s and fighter jets. And so he did visit, and there are actually pictures of it. If you look it up online, it's a beautiful thing. So he had visited Lebanon. I'm trying to remember. There was a conference in North Africa at the time. It was a Pan-African conference, and the PLO had actually attended. And there's this really viral image that kind of captures that moment where it was a couple of Palestinian guys smoking cigarettes, and alongside them were some leaders from the Black Panthers. So it shows you that the history runs deep. You know, I didn't know about this until I'd say a year ago. So the fact that it took me like a bunch of digging to even find that out, I know that it's going to take a lot for other people to find out. So I'm just trying to spread that message of the connection and the history.
So kind of like even really the point that you're raising, like there's like solidarity across the struggle against oppression. And so something about the Black Panther Party was able to see the Palestinian struggle for justice, like the shared struggle.
Yeah, and I'd say even like goes beyond the Black Panther Party. Like so many figures that we had in America did speak up about Palestine, such as Malcolm X. Malcolm X spoke a lot about the Palestinian struggle, the right to fight back. You know, a lot of times Palestinians we have a muzzle put upon us. Like, why don't you just accept peace? Why don't you do this and that? But, you know, it's hard to accept peace when you have a boot on your neck. And Malcolm X speaks about that. And he talks about how, you know, you can't ask for justice from the same person depriving you of justice, you know. So it is a lot more complicated than that. It's easy for a person in America who's not, you know, too immersed in it to just, you know, school Palestinians, like, you know, you guys have been, you know, whining for 75 years, just accept a peace deal, just take a concession. But, you know, as one Palestinian thinker, Ghassan Kanafani puts it, it's a conversation between the sword and the neck. So it's not as simple as people would like to describe it in my eyes.
Well, you know, that makes me think of like recent comments. I don't know if that was Angela Davis, but she called it a moral litmus test, the question of Palestine and how the world would respond. And so, I mean, you really seem to be kind of touching upon that. And so how should the world respond?
I mean, I agree. The fact that it is a litmus test, and it's unfortunate to see how some people have responded. We don't put a huge expectation on people. If a person is living in the West, there's not much direct action they can take to deal with the conflict or deal with the occupation. But there are some duties we have in terms of speaking up, given that over there, they don't have a voice. We do have a voice here. So that is a simple thing we can offer. We're not, you know, giving away anything financially or taking away from ourselves. Sorry, just by using our voice. So I see that as one of the duties given to, you know, people living abroad in case of that litmus test. You know, I've had conflict in some friendships where people are aware of what's going on, but they don't want to say anything to risk their careers or well-beings. And at the end of the day, I can't stop someone from making their own decision, but I can't really view that person the same, given that it is literally my people dying. You know, it's not the same as it's crazy when it's your own people, your own family. You know, I have friends and I hear about their family actively being killed in Gaza. This is directly connected to me. And when I see someone who is refusing to even speak one word, I kind of see that as a betrayal to some extent. I also see myself as patient. I'm not a very like one and done, you do this, I hate you. I do try to shift a person's, I don't want to say shift an opinion, but give perspective. You know, a lot of times people just don't know enough. And I try my best in my ability to give perspective. But when that doesn't work, I have done my job. You know, it's, you know, you can't force a horse to drink the water, you know. So at that point, it's up to that person to make their decision.
Okay. No, as I'm sitting with you, you know, there's lots of events going on in the world, and you know, October 7th happened, but prior to that, there's all kind of stuff happening. So much so that folks have declared Palestine like an occupation, an apartheid state. So I don't know, can you help us with kind of your understanding of how you would frame things there?
Of course. So that's a big issue we have, given that a lot of the history gets forgotten. And, you know, it goes back all the way to 1948 with the first Arab-Israeli war. And that's where you could say a lot of what we have now began. And that starts with the Nakba. And the Nakba is an Arabic word for catastrophe. And it talks about the 800,000 Palestinians that were expelled from their homes during that war, as well as the, I think, around 20,000 that were killed and massacred. And that is something we all hold very dearly. You know, we did not experience it. We're the grandchildren of the people who experienced the Nakba, but there is that generational trauma almost. And we see it day to day in the way that, you know, land is still being confiscated in the West Bank. This is not something that just happened once and ended in that war or in that month of fighting. This is something that has never ended in a sense. You know, people were kicked out and people continue to get kicked out. So when you look at Gaza, in that tiny strip of land, there's 2.2 million people. And it's one of the most densely populated areas in the world. So that's not natural. It's not like, oh, they just had a lot of kids. A lot of the people in Gaza were refugees from other towns, villages, and cities in Palestine, from neighboring areas, from more in the north. So they were already refugees, you know, they're like displaced in their own country. And now the same thing is happening. We see that right now, I think the statistic is 1.5 million Gazans have been displaced from the north. These are people who were refugees once in 1948, maybe refugees again in 1967. And now in 2023, they are being displaced a third time. A lot of the times when you see these big words of areas being airstriked, it's not towns, it's refugee camps. So it's refugee camps that people have been in for generations. And now they're being displaced from the refugee camps that they called home because they had nothing else to call home. And that is seen everywhere, not just in Gaza. In Lebanon, there are refugee camps that remain. You know, people that have grown up that know nothing but this camp. They call this camp home, but is it really a home? Syria as well has refugee camps. Jordan. So it comes back to my first point about the diaspora. Palestinians are displaced everywhere, you know, apart from refugee camps. There are the ones who are more lucky to make it to America, to Europe, even to South America. And they still hold that connection, given that they were kicked out and never able to return to their lands. A big symbol we have is the key. A lot of Palestinians, when they were kicked out in 1948, held on to the keys of their homes. And that kind of carries the idea that this is not forever, that, you know, having your home again is something that will inevitably happen. And so keys are passed down generation to generation. You know, started with our grandparents and great grandparents who moved down those keys to their descendants and down to us. So there is that optimism in a sense that people do hold a dear connection to the land despite all the hardships that they do face.
Yeah, it seems like you're really describing a narrative of colonialism and just the influences and generational trauma across the time. And then the symbolism of holding on to the key and like what that means.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned colonialism because, you know, growing up, I was very aware of this even as a kid. You know, I spent my summers in the West Bank. I saw Israeli soldiers pointing guns at me, raiding my grandma's house. You know, many nights we had to keep the windows closed because we would suffocate from the tear gas that was out on the streets. And so I did know about everything, but I didn't have an understanding. So, you know, as a kid, I'd be like, why? Like, why is this happening? Even going into high school and even college, I'm like, this is all, you know, disgusting acts, but like, what is it? Do people just have a sick heart? And, you know, I started reading up on like historical books and on thinkers, and looking into colonialism. It's kind of like the connecting the dots, given that this not just happened like out of nowhere, you know. It's not like people just decided to come and take this land. It's linked with other acts of colonialism, you know, like the emergence of Zionism as a political movement came with the backing of the British, with the Balfour Declaration, where, you know, Lord Balfour proclaimed the land of Palestine to be the Zionist state. I think a big misconception about Zionism was it wasn't even specific to Palestine. When Zionism emerged in the late 1800s, yes, there were, you know, Jewish thinkers who wanted like a homeland, but they had other ideas, other propositions. So there were propositions to create a homeland in Africa, in South America, even in Europe. And so that kind of just destroys the entire argument about it being specific to the land of Palestine. And they did end up, you know, choosing Palestine, of course. And that is when colonialism began, even before 1948. You know, all of us, you know, when we're talking about the big events, we talk about 1948 being the war. But there was, of course, a buildup. You know, a war did not just start out of nowhere. And a big way this began was land purchases. And you had organizations that were not just people looking to find a home. It was organizations that were backed by billions of dollars from Europe to purchase up land and build developments in Palestine. And that kind of could be seen as a form of neocolonialism. It's not the same as colonialism as the British, in the sense that it was, you know, people coming as an arm of their country to establish it. At the same time, you can see a lot of the same remnants of it, given the way land was purchased, not from Palestinians, but from other absentee landlords. A lot of the land, for example, was simply sold by the Ottomans. And this was a way to establish a stronghold into Palestine. When you look at maps, a lot of times land by the coast was built up. And what this meant was, during the war, they were able to use the coast to keep bringing in weapons. The ports, the port of Haifa was used during the 1948 war to bring weapons in from Europe. That's what the Israeli militias at the time used. Even before, to bring in, you know, mass immigration, they would use those ports that they had purchased land around, making it hard for, you know, the people that lived there to have a say in anything. So that is kind of the history. It is, I'd say, so complex and intricate. Just that buildup, that like piece of history between, I would say, the late 1800s following up to 1948. So much happened that led to what we actually saw with the Nakba. It all kind of carries a connection.
And so just even to talk about what's happening today in 2023, you really have to understand like this overarching story. But then at the same time, it seems so simple, I guess, from a humanistic standpoint. It's like, how do we love people and help them exist together? And is that even possible, I guess?
Yeah, it's unfortunate, you know, when, you know, I'll be Palestinian and I'll just mention what's going on with my family, and I'll have a person that comes to me acting like, you know, a senior political analyst, justifying what's going on. And it's tough because a lot of times I'm not even asking this person to take a political stance. I'm just asking them to acknowledge humanity, like you mentioned. You know, in my opinion, some things are just, you know, indiscussible in the fact that war crimes are being committed. You know, when you see the statistics, you know, I myself, I'm not a big fan of statistics because I see it, especially with Palestinians, as being dehumanizing. It's like every year we have to prove ourselves with how many children or women have been killed. And it's the same now. You know, the war started, or this current conflict began on October 7th. We came out, we're like, 1,000 children have died. We came out the second week, 3,000 children. We came out again, 5,000 children. And it's almost humiliating in a way, like, what number is enough in that case? And is there a number that is enough? And that is why I see a lot of it as, not something to argue, especially when you look at when Gaza, and whether you want to argue about Israel's right to self-defense, I think the most recent update from the health ministry is 15,000 dead civilians. So that brings a statistic about for every one militant that Israel kills, 100 civilian dies. And, I'm not an expert, but for the most advanced military in the world, what does that mean when you need to kill 100 civilians to kill one potential enemy? Regardless of, political arguments or what someone thinks about how much of an arm Israel is allowed to reach into Gaza, in what world is that explained? It's a higher rate than any near conflict. Ukraine, Syria, none of those even compare to the rates of children being killed right now. I think I saw a statistic, and it was at the time when only 4,000 children had been killed in Gaza, and it totaled to more than the last 5 years of children being killed in all conflicts worldwide. So in just that 3 weeks of warfare, 4,000 children were killed. I don't see a justification for that. Entire towns and cities are being razed to the ground, and in my opinion, that is with an intention. So now 1 million Gazans have been displaced from northern Gaza, and I see that in itself as an extension of the Nakba, given that they weren't killed, but they were displaced from their homes forcibly, and the issue is they won't be able to come back because Israel's aggression has been to such a higher level that everything is rubble now. When you look at images of northern Gaza and you look at satellite images before and after, it's entire cities, entire communities that were built over centuries just brought down to rubble. So how will those people return? Right, go ahead.
Well, I mean, you're saying the Nakba, so since 1948 and then events leading up to it. Yeah. And so, I mean, I'm just thinking about technology and social media and pictures and smartphones. And so I don't know how that's shifting the narrative, the story that's being told, because it's quite a thing to see some of those images that are coming out.
Oh, absolutely. I told you before, I see myself as optimistic regardless of what's going on. And I do see the narrative changing in regards to social media. You could say this is one of the first conflicts where we are able to see everything in front of us, on our phones. I feel like it also brings people closer. Now they can't ignore it. They see everything going on. They can't just claim it's a lie when there are videos in front of them. And I see public opinion shifting. There was a case with TikTok where some Israeli organizations met with, the executives of TikTok to complain that TikTok was pushing out pro-Palestinian propaganda. And the headline was almost like so funny in itself. TikTok's response was, "We're not pushing out anything. People are simply pro-Palestine." And that shows you a shift, especially with the younger generations. There's such a big gap when you look at the older age groups, say like 60 to 70 versus like 18 to 30. And the fact that their thinking has changed. They are changing their minds, There are a lot of people, even who I know, who previously, would choose not to say anything. And again, I can't make someone say anything, so I never push that on anyone. But now they're coming to me to voice their support. And this is just on a small scale, just like my personal experiences. But I think even that speaks volume, Despite all the negative interactions at school with, people, saying not too nice of words, I've also been receiving the opposite and more, given that people come up to me in solidarity. Some of them are afraid to do it publicly, but they'll come to me in private. I'll get messages, text messages, calls, people just, showing their support essentially. So I think social media has actually been such a huge factor in changing it, in the fact that nothing can be hidden. And this, I wanted to tie into another topic, and that is the targeting of journalists. And right now in Gaza, over 60 journalists have been killed, which I think in itself is a crazy number. Like 60 people being killed by itself could be considered a massacre. This is 60 journalists, people who have a press vest on at all times. And we're talking about the Israeli military with like the most advanced technology in the world. No one in Gaza walks without being known, with drones being there 24/7. They know who everyone is. Even in the West Bank, in our villages, there were cameras everywhere, given that they know who every single person is doing what they are doing. And in my opinion, I see this as journalists being targeted. There's a lot of information being spread on pro-Israeli accounts, literally calling for journalists to be targeted. Every time a journalist dies, they celebrate it. And then they put a picture of a living journalist calling for them to be next. One specific story that kind of struck me was a journalist named Wa'il Ad-Dahdouh, and he's a senior journalist with Al Jazeera. You know, he's been reporting for decades, and his family fled from northern Gaza as instructed by the Israeli military. They were forced to leave their homes, but they still did it for safety. So they were in southern Gaza, past the border, in what would have been supposed to be a safe area. And Wa'il was reporting live, and as he was reporting live, he found out that his entire family was killed in an airstrike. All of them in southern Gaza. No military, no potential target. His whole family was killed. The specific house they were seeking shelter in was targeted. I'm not an expert in military actions, but I don't know how you can explain that. And what kind of was even crazier was that Israeli reporters came out the next day saying that it was targeted. Some of them weren't even hiding it. They were celebrating it. And that's the funny dynamic I see now in this social media realm of pro-Israeli media, where you have people on the ground in Israel who openly celebrate genocide. Even there have been elected officials calling for a Nakba. There was the Israeli security cabinet minister and agriculture minister. His name is Avi Dichter. A few days ago, he said, Gaza Nakba 2023, that's how it will end. He's an elected official, an elected representative, and he's saying this. And even then, you have people in America trying to deny it. So I see that as a very ironic dynamic when you do have those people back in Israel just not giving a shit, basically. You know, they're saying all of this. They don't care. They're saying it for what it is. You have even Israeli soldiers who take videos on their own celebrating the occupation. I saw a picture of this Israeli soldier over a house that was all rubble, and he said, "Apocalypse now, your time will come." So these are the people actively taking part in the occupation, and they are not hiding anything. All of them are advocating for genocide. A lot of disgusting videos have emerged. Not even leaks from our sides. It's their own people recording these videos because they just see it as almost comedic. There was a video from the West Bank. There was a mosque and the call to prayer was being announced, and you could hear the reciter, or in Arabic, the mu'adhin, the person who, you know, makes the call to prayer, giving the call to prayer. And this one Israeli soldier was recording another soldier, and he looked back to him to make sure he was recording. He takes a stun grenade and throws it into the mosque. These are soldiers acting on their own, meaning it shows you that they know that there are no repercussions. You know, they're almost happy to be doing these things and recording them on their own. Apart from our journalists who are shedding light on Palestine, these are the aggressors recording their own war crimes, celebrating it because they do see us as subhuman, and they know that there will not be any repercussions.
When you describe that, I guess for me, I guess what I'm really wondering is, where does this depth of hope come from? Because it just, like, as you're really talking about the soldiers and kind of some of the things that you're describing just in this very moment, like, I'm like, how do you really retain a sense of hope?
I guess I just look back to the people actually facing all this carnage face to face. You know, sometimes I find myself like trying to give up, like, oh, there's no hope, like, oh, we're over. But then I see images and videos of people in Gaza who have lost their entire families, extended families, like their whole family's wiped, and they keep pushing. And it's kind of a humbling phenomenon.
Or like, man, Mohamed, you made it to America, man. Just study, get your degree.
I'm like, drinking Fiji water. I can't be complaining about, you know, some loss of hope I have, given my, you know, the blessings I have. And so that is a reminder. It's kind of, again, ties back to Islam that, you know, teaches us to have tawakkul. Tawakkul means, it's the Arabic word for the Islamic concept of reliance on God. So putting trust in God even through hardship. So there is that religious aspect of it where you see these people who lose their whole families, and then, you know, they get interviewed and they just talk about their trust in God. You know, some of them will even say Alhamdulillah, meaning thank God. And it doesn't mean they're thanking God for what happened, but they're thanking God for what is still left, given that they are still breathing. It is, you know, videos of kids who are, you know, amputees, and not just one arm, like kids who have lost both their legs, both their arms, and they're still being thankful. And it is kind of a reality check, given where I am, where I stand. And yeah, that is kind of what, you know, keeps me going.
You were about to say something, I think.
I was just gonna bringing it back to the journalists, there's a very popular journalist on Instagram right now. His name is Mohamed. I think he's amassed over 15 million followers. And he's independent, by the way, doesn't represent anyone. And he's been making videos basically begging for international protection because there's Israeli media coming out and labeling journalists as Hamas operatives. This is part of the aspect of dehumanizing civilians in Gaza to, put them as almost complicit for the actions of any other entity or group. And it is basically a green light to go ahead and kill them. That's why 60 journalists have already been killed with no repercussions. I think 5 journalists in Lebanon on the northern border as well have been killed. And this guy is basically begging for people to keep an eye on him. He's saying that 24/7 he can hear drones above his house. He's getting calls on like no caller ID constantly calling him. It is a terrifying thing. Another journalist who I would say has gotten very famous, her name is Plestia, and she had to leave Gaza. And she released a video today claiming that she was just receiving so many death threats and warnings that she was going to be targeted that she had to leave. And that's such a difficult decision because while she's doing that, many people don't even have the option of leaving, but she was left with no choice. She wanted to stay and her family basically told her, like, you have to leave. And that was purely for the fact that, she was facing death threats. And it's not death threats in the sense of it's just coming from random trolls online. Like, it's literally coming from the Israeli military. Like, they have their published channels where they are releasing that these people are next. They release a picture of a guy and put a red target on him. This is happening, like we are seeing the targeting of journalists. It's kind of horrifying to watch.
So what can you do? What can people who want to support the journalists, like what can be done?
I mean, again, there's not much that can be done, but it's not nothing.
Okay. So you were taking me from hope to no hope. No hope.
I was making, a big point people make when they're in America, even other Palestinians I've met, is they kind of say like, oh, I'm here, I can't do anything, might as well do nothing. My perspective is they're not wrong. Like, thinking of it, logically, they're not wrong that there's not much that you can directly do to help Gaza, but at the same time, the little that you can do means so much. Just in the aspect of amplifying voices, amplifying Palestinian voices in Gaza and in the US. Right now, there's, I'd say a campaign to target Palestinian voices. I'm part of the student organization named Students for Justice in Palestine at SDSU. And we are a student, Dr. Ricky, we are 3 students on the board. You know how much money we receive from the school per year? $200. Okay. So everything we do is out of our own time, our own money. And right now we are receiving campaigns against us from multi-million-dollar nonprofits. I don't even want to call them nonprofits, but just organizations basically labeling us a threat, calling for schools to get us banned. And we have seen that happen in Colombia, where SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, was banned. There's a campaign against us at SDSU to get banned, claiming that, we are breaking the code of conduct and inciting violence, even though all our events have been like honoring dead children and dead civilians. So I would tell those people who are wondering how they can support, just to keep amplifying those voices, to not allow that to happen. It's kind of insane to see that in 2023, it's almost like our, freedom of speech is being suppressed. It goes back to that, a person doesn't need to be even pro-Palestinian, which I would like them to be pro-Palestinian, but apart from your views on that, just from the aspect of you being an American, believing in the Constitution, believing in the right to free speech, like, how does that affect you? Given that Florida, as a state, has banned the organization entirely in all universities. Columbia has banned it. There's been campaigns in other schools to get the organization banned. And again, we're seeing that in SDSU. Again, led by these organizations who have thousands of staff. It's almost flattering in a way. I'm just one short 5'7" guy, and I guess I'm seen as a threat to these like multi-millionaires. Like, it's flattering. It's scary, but it's flattering. Like, damn, I really pose that threat to them, like, just with my voice. That's why I do see a voice as so powerful, given that they view us as that threat purely from our voices, because we don't have money, we don't have anything else. So I do call on people to use their voice because it means so much being here.
So you have a way to, like, if listeners wanted to send a donation to help you out, like, there's a way to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say if someone is trying to give their support financially, there is the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund. They are the main organization on the ground now, like providing humanitarian relief for people in Gaza. And that is the way we have been donating. You know, I was blessed to say that we had an event last Friday and we raised $1,000 for the charity. Yeah, I was, you know, really happy to see it. So we'll be donating all proceeds to the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund. And yeah, if anyone is wanting to give their support through money, then I would recommend that channel.
So you don't want to put a little bit more money in the coffers for SJP?
No, I think, you know what? I think we're.
You think you're okay?
I think we're doing all right. I think right now we don't need it. You know, like the people of Gaza need it more than anything. That's why, you know, we held some events and, you know, we're donating all profits to charities right now. You know, I think we're doing all right now. Okay. You know, it is exhausting, but you know, it's the least.
Yeah. So I'm just,
can do.
Even with like everything that we've been talking about today, I'm just so curious. Like you're a mechanical engineer, civil engineer, and also. You got a minor too. That's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So how do you keep all this together and get everything done?
To be honest, I'm not right now. Okay. I mean, like, I have been very overwhelmed, and I kind of have to choose to sacrifice some things at sometimes, and I've kind of accepted that it's not the most ideal, you know, scenario to have as a college student. At the same time, you know, I feel like I do have some duties as a Palestinian to support my people.
You feel really called to do this work, like when I think about identity, meaning, and purpose, and just what you've expressed and shared with us.
Exactly. Right? Yeah. Like even if no person was putting pressure on me and I was living in the shadows, I feel like a part of me internally would be putting that pressure on me. And so I do feel it as a duty. So even sometimes I get exhausted. I don't want to do it. You know, I'm, you know, running on no sleep. You know, I'm struggling in school, you know, like I'm losing the time to see my friends, but I just almost see it as a sacrifice, you know, so I don't get sad about it. I don't get mad like, oh, it's so unfair. I don't have time for myself. Like, oh, I wish I had money or this and that. Like, I don't see it that way. You know, I kind of just accept it for what it is, you know. Tawakkul. Remember that word? Like just put the rest in God's hands and just keep pushing. I'm still, you know, functioning, you know, breathing. So I think I'm fine.
Okay. What are some books, articles, or podcasts you might recommend for the listeners here?
So one book I would highly recommend for people trying to learn history is The 100 Years War on Palestine, written by Rashid Khalidi. He's a professor at Columbia. And I feel like this is a great book that even I have read myself as a Palestinian that kind of captures everything. You know, it's called The 100 Years War because Khalidi acknowledges that nothing started a second ago. Nothing even started in 1948. There was a buildup given the emergence of political ideas moving into, you know, physical action. So that book does kind of sum up everything well. And that's a nonfiction book. And another book that I recommend is named Men in the Sun by Ghassan Kanafani. And this is a fictional novel. And I believe that, you know, fictional books, you know, stories just made up, like stories about our people are equally important as the facts, because that's the only thing that actually captures our emotions and our suffering and what we went through. You know, you can read a million statistics and memorize a bunch of dates, but what does that mean when you're not connected to these people? You know, you don't know a personal story. Going back to the aspect of statistics almost being dehumanizing. That's why I believe in putting stories up front first before anything else. And Men in the Sun speaks about Palestinian refugees and their struggle in trying to escape and find safety. And then a final book I would recommend is named On Palestine by Ilan Pape. And I highly recommend this book because it's actually written by an Israeli. So that's an interesting dynamic we have when there's a lot of Israeli thinkers who come out and like denounce their support for Israel because they acknowledge the things they grew up with, the propaganda that they were fed even when they served in the army. So I think it's a great perspective showing an Israeli speaking on Palestine.
All right. And then for my listeners who don't read books, but they will listen to a podcast, where would you send them?
So the first one, it's actually in Arabic, but they provide English subtitles. It's called Bidun Uraq, meaning without papers. And the reason I recommend this is it's actually a Kuwaiti podcast. But what's so interesting with them is they get everyone. They have such a diverse guest list on their podcast. They bring politicians, religious leaders, activists, athletes. And I would say it's a podcast I listen to just because it's just very entertaining and informational when you get, one day they're speaking to like a supermodel, the next day they're talking to some like highly religious scholar. And I do enjoy even then, because I'd say my Arabic is not the best. I'll use the subtitles sometimes, so I think it works perfectly fine. Another one I have is called The East is a Podcast, and this one I'd say is less entertaining. It's more informational, it's like, but they go into a lot into the critical thinking in regards to Palestine, going into specific individuals, specific social movements, even specific books. And so if a person is really trying to immerse themselves in that aspect, then I see it as a great podcast given like the information they provide.
Thank you. Before I let you get out of here, my last question. So what's one question you'd wish I'd asked you, and how would you have answered it?
So I'd say there's a million questions, It's unfortunate because there's so much I want to say on such a short time period. I find myself just yapping sometimes and going on and on and on. But I think one question, it would actually be a collective question to all Palestinians, and it's to like, how do we feel? It goes back to the aspect of showing that we are, not just a statistic. We are people, each of us with stories, each of us with ambitions, and each of us with feelings. So I think right now, more than anything, is so important to highlight individual Palestinians as humans, their interests, who they are, how all of this has made them feel, regardless of political opinion on whether this person did right or wrong. It's the aspect of how does a person who's living through it actually feel,
Mm-hmm. How do you feel?
Hopeful. I would say I've been facing a lot of hardship. It's very hard moving on with my day-to-day life, waking up to like videos of dead children. A lot of times I, don't want to get up, don't want to go to school, go to work, or go about my day. At the same time, there is almost that like invisible spirit pushing me, just the duty. And yeah, I would say that's how I feel. And I would just kind of remind everyone listening that Palestinians are humans. We're all, people grew up with childhoods, had hopes and dreams. A lot of us lost that, given, all those children that died, they're never going to have, they're never going to accomplish any of those dreams. So I do kind of want to highlight that, it's not just 7,000. It's not just a number, 7,000 dead. It's, 7,000 individuals who had a favorite show, a favorite, breakfast, a favorite like superhero. Mm-hmm. They all, had a dream job. There's people who wanted to be doctors, people who wanted to be pilots. And I think that's important. We can't, lose the connection to the humanity aspect.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of superpowers, what's your superpower?
My superpower?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a superpower.
You don't have a superpower?
Yeah.
I might disagree with you.
I'd say my superpower is being Palestinian.
Ah,
yeah.
Okay.
Just in it's tough being Palestinian when you've never known your homeland, and you wake up every year to wars and people being killed. But at the same time, I almost feel like such a high pride to be Palestinian too. I almost feel like it's like a chosen duty. Like I was chosen to be Palestinian and to speak up and to keep fighting. So, if you were telling me to choose one, I would say that's my superpower.
Being Palestinian. Absolutely. Yep. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for, giving me a platform, allowing me to speak. I hope that even if people disagree with me, that maybe their perspectives were a little changed in remembering who Palestinians are as a people.
Mm-hmm. When you were sharing about like the kids and they had their favorite shows and they would have did this and, maybe they were playing soccer and their football in the street. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just so curious about some of your favorite foods.
My favorite food is it's an Arabic dish. It's a Palestinian dish. It's called msakhan, and it's basically chicken with a bunch of herbs and spices wrapped up in bread. It's a very special dish because it's not something you can find in a restaurant. It's not like an easy grab and go. You can't go to an Arab restaurant and get it. So it has to be, made with mom's love and everything. So it's, it's a dish that I love.
Yeah, there's so much that is universal, love and maybe chicken or maybe not, I don't know. But there's so much that does connect us. And as just really sitting with you today, I'm feeling that. And I know the listeners are. So I just really, really want to thank you for coming on and interrupting your studies to spend this time on the Dr. Ricky Pope Show talking about identity, meaning, and purpose.
No, it was really an honor. I was really happy to be here. And like you said, like we all have much more in common than we don't. Maybe we have differing identities, but that's as far as it goes. I think like deep down, everyone is very connected.
This has been an enlightening, informative conversation, and I really learned a lot about Palestine and really, Mohamed, your story and the theme of identity, meaning, and purpose. And I just really want to thank you for the depth of information and sharing. And I think you're going to have to come back again and tell us more.
I think so.
Yeah,
I think so. And I was, so grateful to be able to share this space with you.
Thank you. So this is the first episode of many more to come. So I just want to thank you for tuning in to the Dr. Ricky Pope Show. Remember to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and if you're listening from your favorite podcast platform, remember to direct download every episode. Take care. The Dr. Pope Show, sponsored by Superhero Friends. Communication is a key to human development. At Superhero Friends, we're all about fostering communication to enable human development. We help people listen, feel, and share meaningful stories. Superherofriends.com.